I'm Sam Rodriguez, co-host of the one and only, or better yet, with the one and only, Ken Harrison, the Mac Daddy Mac. This is Daring Faith. Hey, Ken, profiles in courage. I mean, very rare thing that we see coming out of D.C. Our mutual friend, Senator James Lankford. Regarding immigration, we have the hype, the rhetoric, right? We have the periphery. We have the extreme views. Senator Lankford comes across and says, we can actually bring a solution to this. We can. And he attempted that solution, one that I wholeheartedly supported. And the art of compromise, John Calhoun, Daniel Webster, it wasn't perfect on either side, but it was a very conservative, by the way, I would even argue biblically substantiated solution. Senator Lankford is with us. Senator Lankford, thank you for that attempt. What took place? Why didn't we get that across the line? The system is broken, obviously. Close to 10 million illegal entries into America. 10 million. Never before in human history. Do your Google due diligence on that. Never before have we ever seen 10 million people enter into a country illegally in that span of time. Never before.
Well, generally, they were behind Alexander the Great or something, slaughtering and raping as they went.
Usually, right. And not even in that specific order.
Yeah.
And here we are. 10 million. 2024, Senator Lankford comes across and says, we can stop this. My friend, first of all, congratulations on the attempt. That speaks to your courage and your conviction. What took place with that?
Yeah, thanks, guys. Good to get a chance to be able to visit with you. It was a frustrating journey, to say the least, because it's obvious. Everybody sees the problem, but in D.C., everybody can see the problem, and they all nod their head when you're talking about the problem. That's the problem. That's the problem. That's the problem. And then you say, okay, let's actually solve it. They're like, I'm really busy doing something else. And so it is a challenge right now to get people focused on the biggest issues that we actually face, this being a big one. As you mentioned, 10 million people. And it's not just the number of people. In the last 18 months, it's been a shift in who is actually crossing our border. If we go 3 years ago, almost everybody crossing our border was from Western Hemisphere. There were a lot of 20-something men coming to look for a job, other families that were coming to be able to connect with families that are already here. The last 18 months, that shifted. Now it's a bunch of 20-something men from the Middle East, from Pakistan, from India, from Russia, from China, from West Africa. The criminal organizations around the world have determined the cartels are making billions, literally with a B, billions of dollars trafficking people in. And so the criminal organizations around the world are like, I want a piece of that. And so they're trafficking people in from around the world. People want to come to America. The problem is we don't know anything about these folks. We don't know their background. We don't know criminal history. We don't know if they're running from the law or if they're running to their family. We have no idea on it because there is no vetting and they're just being released by the thousands every day. So my push was, this is a national security risk. Everybody can have opinions about immigration, where things are, but at the level that we're at right now, we've got to make it stop. So when it's a national security issue, I don't care what party you're from, I'm going to find somebody to be able to work with, whoever's willing to be able to sit down and solve the problem. Let's figure out how we can solve it. And what I laid out was a basic principle. This is not about immigration as a whole. This is not about 12 million people in the country that are here illegally and what are we going to do. It wasn't about any of that. It was about, how do we secure the border? How do we do that? That is changing the laws on asylum. That's changing the processing that we do at the border. That's changing our court hearings to make sure they're expedited and fast, so that people that deserve asylum, which is a fraction of the people that apply, those folks get in, and the vast majority of folks that don't qualify for asylum, that are gaming the system, they get turned around. And so we can make this chaos stop. So that was my focus. I sat down with a progressive Democrat from New England and an independent from Arizona, and we worked for 4 months to be able to hash out, where can we find common ground among all of us that would settle this issue, brought it to the body, and we had a significant group of folks, but it wasn't 60. We need 60 people to be able to start debate in the Senate. We had more than 50, but we didn't have 60. And so literally we couldn't even start debate on the bill.
You know, we're really good friends, the three of us. We've had a lot of long conversations, and I've gotten to, we were talking while you were negotiating all that. And it seemed to me, it was a little bit like you were Uriah, and David said, get him up to the wall by the enemy, and then we're all going to go back really quick and just leave him up by himself. And that's how it felt when you announced that plan, and a couple days later, everybody was attacking you. It was just so brutally unfair. And you were like, well, Ken, that's just Washington, don't get so worked up about it. But the lack of justice and honesty to me was appalling. And I don't know how you put up with it.
Yeah, Ken, it's frustrating because politically things changed in that time. But we started working on it in October of 2023. We had the highest number of illegal crossings for any October in history, the highest number of any November in history, the highest December in history. In fact, in December was the highest single day in history of 12,000 people in one day that illegally crossed the border.
Wow.
So the numbers are just massive coming across the border and just unstoppable. And people are saying, solve it, solve it, solve it, solve it. But then we drifted into 2024 and the presidential primaries started popping up. And a bunch of folks started to say, hey, listen, this is the best political weapon that President Trump has in running. Everybody knows he handles the border a lot better than Biden. The side by side is excellent to be able to have. Don't solve it now. It's too late to solve it. Don't solve it. And my issue was, and I said it publicly multiple times, I said, listen, he has a job. He was running a campaign. That's his job. I have a job. I'm elected. My job's national security. His job is the campaign to be able to get that done. We can't confuse the two at this point. When you're elected, you've got to just focus on the actual task that has to be done. And I still had a lot of folks that walked away, and it was crazy stuff, as you and I talked about on this. My favorite was the 5,000 number. I had people saying, your bill lets in 5,000 people a day, every single day before it does anything. How can I support that? And I would laugh and go, how would I support that? It doesn't do that. The way the bill was set up, the very first person that crossed the border each day was detained, quickly screened with a brand new fast screening process, and then deported. But if we had 5,000 people crossing or more in a day, you don't have time to screen all those people. So if you have that many people come across, we didn't screen anymore. We just detained and deported. So the way it works, day one, first person, you detain, you quickly screen, and you deport. If you get to 5,000, you just detain and deport. And a lot of folks will go, well, I heard it did nothing until 5,000. I was like, well, you should actually read the bill. There is a 5,000 number in there, but it's like the emergency break glass. We take away all due process, which is unheard of for what we're doing at the border. But it was the moment to say we can't have days like we had, for instance, yesterday. Yesterday, when we're recording this, 5,800 people illegally crossed the border yesterday. We had a huge, massive surge. And everybody was just let in because it's too many people to handle. So they just open it up. So we've got to make that stop.
Senator Lankford, so help me. And I full disclosure, I watch primarily conservative news channels. I never heard of this, meaning I was privy to the bill. I didn't read every detail. I did not. But the 5,000 argument, I never heard this iteration, the actual version of it laid out by Senator Lankford. What I heard continuously was there's a trigger. 5,000 is the trigger. And that's the trigger, 5,000. Hence, you're going to permit 5,000 illegal entries, and then things are applied. Goodness gracious. Just the lack of appropriate information dissemination with great intentionality, with a political agenda behind it. You can have a question for Senator Lankford that's non-controversial. It makes immigration look like it's a walk in the park. It's non-controversial, no implication whatsoever. What's the question you have for Senator Lankford regarding this 2024 election?
Well, there's a comment I want to make first, which is I was just reading that Hideous Strength again by C.S. Lewis. I try to read all C.S. Lewis books like every 5 years, go through them all. And I was reading it with my daughter, who's an English teacher. And I came across this point where the evil woman chief of police is talking to the foolish professor, and she's talking about the way they do things. And she says, don't you understand that we need to have a right that's completely extreme and a left that's completely extreme? And they keep fighting with each other, and then we control them both through the middle. And he said, well, how do you do that with actually educated people? And she says, oh, don't you realize the only ones we can manipulate are the educated people? The working man doesn't fall for this. He knows when he reads the newspaper that it's all propaganda. He's just reading it for the football scores. It's the educated that we manipulate. But we've got to keep the right and the left at each other's throats in order to make any of this work. And I was like, dude, he wrote that in 1940.
Wow.
And so, when you see Fox News, I mean, a lot of the lead-ins to all these programs are always outrage. They always have to be outraged because that's what sells programs and sells clicks.
Unfortunately.
And I've watched, I've talked to a couple of Fox News hosts, and I've talked about that and said, what is your deal with Lankford? Like, why are you going after? He's like completely honest and serving people with a great heart. And it's all about clicks, man. And so you got to understand a lot of what we see is propaganda.
All the click rate, my friend.
Now, speaking of that,
here we go,
James. You are a Baptist pastor. I know you to be a man of God,
man of integrity,
a loving, gentle heart. You are everything that's right. You are literally Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I mean, you went there to do the right thing.
Except he was a Democrat, by the way. I was brokenhearted when I got to the Senate and figured that part out.
He was?
He was?
He was. I know.
Well, Jimmy Stewart was a Republican in real life. How in the world can a man of God like you support Donald Trump for president?
Oh, wow.
Let me back up just a hair. I'm not going to avoid your question, but I do want to say I talk a lot about the anger issue you talked about before, and you are correct. The media is all about, if you're angry yesterday, just wait till today. I'm going to make you even angrier today. Yep. And people have this fear of missing out, like, oh, there's something even worse than yesterday, and so I've got to be able to watch. And it's this constant feed the anger, feed the anger, feed the anger. And so the country gets angry and angry and angry and more divided. And by the way, there's plenty to be angry about: our debt, our deficit, our immigration, the chaos that's actually happening.
Abortion.
There's plenty of things to be upset about. Abortion, yeah. So all of those things people get mad about, but anger without productivity, without actually engaging, it just makes you angrier. And so my challenge is always to be able to say, especially people that are people of faith, to say, if you complain more than you pray, you're out of balance. Yes. And it's just a basic thing. And I find people griping all the time about what's going on. And I say, if you're complaining more than you're praying, you're out of balance, number one. Number two, on that, those people that you're griping about in DC, that's my mission field. I'd appreciate if you pray for those folks, because I believe, as 2 Corinthians 5 says, that I used to think of people from a worldly point of view, but I do so no longer. So that's a person that God cares about as well. What could God do in their life if God were to be able to get a hold of them? So spend time praying for them, no matter who they are at that point. And the third thing is, when you find yourself angry, go do something productive to make it better. Go serve kids. Go find a way to be able to help the homeless. Go find a way to be able to engage in a state party or whatever it may be. Find something that's productive. Don't just sit there on your couch and stew and be angry, or just gripe to your friends at the coffee shop. Do something about it. The country gets better not when we gripe more. The country gets better when we do something about it to be able to make things better. And so follow through and do something about it on it. As far as the Trump question, it's a big issue, obviously, and there's a lot of frustration, and people are all over the map. I meet Christians all the time that'll say Trump is, Nebuchadnezzar incarnate. He's the king that no one would expect, that God's going to use in miraculous ways. My response to that is, God raises up and he puts down as he chooses. He's very clear that God is sovereign. He chooses the leaders for times. We actually receive leaders often that match who we are. When I see people all the time that say, DC is an anomaly, it's a crazy, noisy, angry place, I laugh and I say, what was Thanksgiving like with your extended family last year? And a lot of people laugh and go, oh, Thanksgiving was crazy. I left early because everybody was mad and yelling at each other over whatever issue on it. America's as divided as DC is. And when I look at the leadership of parties, it looks like where America is right now. And so for me, my first step is I look at the Old Testament and the New and ask a simple question: what is God teaching us as followers of Christ based on the leaders that are around, about how to pray, how to engage, how to care for people? What's he doing in us? Because I often see throughout Scripture, God was accomplishing something in his people based on the leaders that were there. And so what is God doing in us first? Second thing I look at and say, here's a challenge. I've got, President Trump, who is very open about his faults, talks about his faults, foul mouth, all kinds of issues, marital, all those things that are in his background that are a reality. And I have people all the time that catch me and say, I just wish he wouldn't post on social media, or he wouldn't say some of the things he says. That's just who he is. That's not going to be taken away from him. That's who he is. I've also got a President Biden who is the most pro-abortion president in the history of the country. He is single-handedly trying to find new ways every day to increase the number of abortions in America. So we've got candidates here that, as a Christian, you look at it, you pray, you ask what's the right thing to be able to do for the nation, you ask what's right for people, and then you move forward from there. I look at policies as well. I see leaders that God raises up and that he uses for purposes and times and the seasons for the church, but I also look at policies. I look at the economy, look at what's happening with illegal immigration. We talked about before about criminal justice and what's happening with trying to be able to stand up for those that are oppressed. I look at the economic development for people that are in poverty was stronger under President Trump than it is under Biden. When I look at how President Trump speaks about Israel versus how Biden speaks about Israel, you'll go through the different policies, pray it through, be able to make a decision. So I'm grateful for the policies that stand with Israel, that stand for the for life for children, that stand up for having an economy, for a growing economy for those that are in poverty, that helps lift people out of poverty. All those are essential things that I look at. But I also say to everybody, if you're looking for a Messiah doesn't live in the White House. That's just not going to be
So
true.
good.
So what is it that God is teaching us that we need to follow through and to be faithful and represent the church? And I never, ever, one last comment, I never, ever want a political party connected to the church. Now, this bugs some people because I have some people say that, Republicans, there are more Christians that are Republicans. All these, okay, fine, we can talk about the statistics and all those things on it. But at the moment, a political party and what happens by a political candidate is connected to the presentation of the gospel, we have watered down the gospel. I never want a pastor to ever be able to say, as I've had some say to me, hey, Democrats wouldn't be comfortable in my church based on the way that I preach. My response to that is, then half the people in your town aren't welcome to hear the gospel. Why in the world would you do that? So speak clearly about the issues that are in Scripture, but don't tie politics and Jesus together. Jesus was very clear. Render unto Caesar's what's Caesar's, render unto God's what's God's, but don't connect the two.
I am grateful for Senator James Lankford, truly. The Lamb's agenda. We can't be married to the donkey or the elephant. As a church, we must be exclusively married to the Lamb, who is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. It's the Lamb's agenda. Senator Lankford, this is going to be like a great hypothetical. Here we go. 4 more years of Biden. What does that look like for America? Go.
Dramatic increase in the number of abortions that happen around the country. We would have a dramatic weakness in our foreign policy. What we've seen with the advance of China under President Biden has been unparalleled in many ways. I think that we would continue to see the advance of what's happening with Russia and a destabilization of our tax policy based on President Biden is currently trying to move American companies paying more taxes overseas than they are to the United States because he wants to be more fair to other countries because America has so many big companies. Well, yes, we do. We have innovation and they pay taxes here, not overseas. So I think that's a big issue that we would have. I think we'd continue to have high inflation. I think we'd continue to have high interest rates. All those affect people in poverty. All those affect senior adults. That's significant to me.
I will make a statement here, and I don't want Senator Lankford to be guilty of conspiring, being part of the statement. I truly believe President Biden gets elected. Of course, Kamala Harris will be there 5 minutes post facto. He will take credit for the first female president, the first African-American female president, of course, female president. I think China invading Taiwan in a Biden second term there's a strong probability behind that because weakness attracts adversity. Without a doubt, we're going to continue to see North Korea and Iran exercise what they are currently engaging in and so forth. Melees, it's just chaos. It's chaotic economically, socially, morally. Give me 4 years of President Trump. Hypothetically, I know. 4 years of Trump. Trump comes in. It's not going to be utopia. Hey, guys, ladies and gentlemen, it will not be the New Jerusalem. Stop it. Only Jesus will usher that in. But give me 4 years of President Trump. What does it look like?
Yeah, so I think we would walk in. There wouldn't be a lot of advancement in abortion, but there would not also be an advancement of creating more on abortion. President Trump has already been pretty clear that he does not want to take a federal role into abortion, which I do. I think it's every layer of government should engage on protecting the value of life of children. But I also don't think a President Trump administration, based on what I saw 4 years ago, he's going to be adamant to be able to protect federal dollars from going for abortion, all of those things. So I think we'd see a decline in the number of abortions. I think we'd see a much stronger foreign policy. I think we'd see China be hesitant to be able to take on Taiwan, which, by the way, if people say, why do I care if China takes on Taiwan? Well, if you like buying a new vehicle, if you like anything that has microchips on it or anything that has any kind of technology on it, a lot of that comes from Taiwan as its base supply chain on it. China takes Taiwan. We can't get access to a lot of our electronics of whatever it may be. And that's a pretty big issue. I think the economy does start to accelerate again because regulations slow down. A lot of what kills an economy is new regulations every 6 months that businesses can't plan and prepare for the future. And if they can't plan and prepare for the future, they're just going to slow down. I think a Trump administration would do what they did 4 years ago and that is step in and say, we're not going to do a lot of new regulations on it. So there's some predictability and investment, which would bring mortgage interest rates down, which would have the economy growing again at a rate that needs to be done. And the biggest issue that was pretty clear is how he'd handle immigration. I know you and I have already talked about the immigration bill. There are things that only Congress can do. Only Congress can change the definition of asylum. Only Congress can advance some of these things. But there are executive actions that Biden took his first week in office that dramatically created this chaos. There are executive actions that President Trump could take that would dramatically slow that number down, dramatically. Can't solve it entirely until Congress acts, but can be a huge decrease in it. So we'd see a drop in illegal immigration immediately.
We have a couple of minutes here. Ken, James, I have just quickly here. There's great concern about post facto, either side of the aisle, primarily coming from the left-wing media. If Trump gets elected, this is what will take place. If Trump loses the election, it'll make January 6th look like a warm-up act and so forth. Do you have any concerns about both sides as it pertains to a response after the election?
The easiest way I would answer that is that what our founding fathers try to protect us from is that every government, every collection of people always goes towards tyranny. They always try to grab more and more power. And so for me, when in doubt, I'm going to go with the group of people that's trying to get less power, but trying to make government smaller. And so whatever else, other issues we haven't covered, the basic idea of the Republican Party, even though they haven't always kept this, is small government, small federal government. And the Democrats are clear. They want bigger government, more power, more taxes, and that always is the downfall of great nations. And so, yeah, I have a concern. I have a concern if the Democrats are able to get enough power. James and I have talked a lot about the deficit. I'm very concerned with the debt of our country and what's going to happen to the U.S. dollar and all that stuff. So for me, even take away all the stuff that James just talked about, I'm supporting President Trump because I support smaller government because that preserves individual human rights more. That's my answer to that question. James, I'll let you take it.
James, how should people be praying, and especially election time, post-election time, how should we be praying, posturing ourselves?
Yeah, let me jump into what Ken just said. Debt is one of our single biggest threats that we do have right now. It continues to accelerate. It's been doubling every 4 years for the last 16. That is non-sustainable. By definition, that's non-sustainable, and that we've got to be able to take that on. That is one of my challenges. President Trump did not take on debt and deficit during his first 4 years. I don't know whether he would in the next 4 years, but America has to take that on. I think it's one of the things that make Americans angry is they feel that. They feel like nothing's being done on something really important. They don't necessarily say this is what needs to be done, but they just feel like something needs to be done to be able to slow down our spending, to be able to get us back in balance. I completely agree on that. We've got to be able to address this. It's something I bring up every single year to my colleagues. We do a debt book that we call Federal Fumbles that just highlights, here's how we're dealing with debt right now. Here's some wasteful spending areas we've got to be able to deal with and to be able to slow all those things down. So praying for the nation, praying for wisdom, by the way, supporting leaders that take a risk to be able to say if there are important things that need to be done, we need to be able to do those things. We need to be able to step up and find ways to be able to support those who are taking a risk to solve our problems, because most of the problems we face are not going to be solved with just a bumper sticker answer. I have folks that'll say solve the issue of debt and deficit by just cutting off foreign aid. That's like 0.5% of the debt that we're facing right now. That's a nice answer, except that just wouldn't work. It wouldn't be significant. Is it a piece of what needs to be done? Sure, glad to engage on that, but we've got to be able to solve it. So as I challenge people, pray for the nation, pray for leaders. Those are biblical mandates to be able to do. Step up and pray for the election and pray that God's will would be done and that we would be honest brokers on it, that we're not worshiping a candidate. We're worshiping the God of the universe that works in our lives in ways that he uses to. God cares about government like he cares, because government affects people. I serve in government. I'm not anti-government. I do meet people that are anti-government. I always laugh and think, okay, that's you, but that's not me on that to be able to be government. I serve in that. And I don't find God as anti-government. Again, I go back to the basic statements of Jesus. Render unto Caesar what's Caesar's, unto God's what's God's. But also look at the Old Testament. 36 books of the 39 in the Old Testament were written to, by, or about a political leader.
Wow.
It's clear.
Wow.
God cares about what's happening in government because he knows it affects people's lives. So pray for the people in government, get engaged, volunteer in campaigns, share ideas. As I said, don't gripe, do, and actually engage in things that will actually make a difference. And if I can do one thing that is Oklahoma specific in this while we're talking, I'm actually stepped into my truck here for a minute. I'm actually at a site where we've got storm damage in Oklahoma, and been out working today and trying to clear debris and limbs and all those things. There's a real need among people around the country, people that are in poverty that need somebody to be able to bring hope, people that are really struggling that just need somebody to show up and to say, I care about you. If you spend all of your time in your house and with the same group of buddies and you're not engaged in a nonprofit, you're not doing something to be able to actually serve people around you. If you're going to church, sitting there and then leaving, and your service to God is ushering and that alone at your church, that's a good service. But many people need to be able to meet someone that brings them a sense of hope to say, somebody showed up when I needed help.
Love that.
That's what we need on it. So continue to be able to do that, find ways to pray and to be able to serve practically.
Serve practically. Senator James Lankford, Ken Harrison, Sam Rodriguez, Daring Faith. Let's do one thing together. Let's go change the world.